think we are live. Just let me mute up and make sure that the audio quality is good. And the audio quality is good. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another installment of the Pale Galilean. And today we're going to be looking at the fine-tuning argument, and specifically an attempted debunk of it. And as I think we're going to see, it really kind of fails to be a qualitative debunk because it comes from a channel called Planet Curious. And I think what we're going to see is that there's a general lack of understanding of what the argument even is trying to do. And additional to that, I think there's even a inability to actually understand things on philosophical terms, because when you look at Planet Curious, it's really just a bunch of atheist fundy arguments and people that kind of peddle those fundy arguments. Admittedly, the people peddling them do have accreditation, so I'll at least give Planet Curious that. And what we're going to see is that there's so much significantly wrong with what's going on here. So with that being said, let me kind of stop my camera here while I do things in the background and I get the presentation set up. So I'm going to share my screen. There we go. Now, this is a video that says the fine-tuning argument debunked in 12 minutes. And what we're going to see, I got a feeling, is that it's going to be very far from being debunked. Now, I may or may not have a co-host coming on with me very shortly, but that's why I also kind of pinned the comment here. Now, even if he doesn't show up, if anybody else wants to come on and ask some questions, provided they are able to demonstrate they are a person and not just a bot trying to stream porn, but that has happened once. A rule for anybody joining is that I need to see a person is on the other end, that they're not just trying to troll or sabotage the stream. So those are the parameters for what we're going to do here. And with that, let's go. And well, when my buddy wants to show up, he can. Here we are.
The fine-tuning problem is a concept that arises in the context of the universe's physical constants and conditions. It refers to the observation that the fundamental parameters of the universe, such as the strength of gravity, the mass of elementary particles, and the electromagnetic force, appears to be precisely set in a way that allows planets, such as ours, to form and life like ours to exist. Because if these values were even slightly different, the universe would be a very different place. Changing the physical constants would play a crucial role in determining the behavior of atoms and molecules, and it would therefore alter chemistry. A slight change in some of the physical constants could lead to significant differences in chemical properties, potentially rendering the formation of complex molecules impossible. It would also alter nuclear reactions that power stars, which would lead to stars with different lifetimes, disturb the nucleosynthesis processes, and the universe would therefore contain different abundances of elements. Any changes would lead to a completely unstable universe with vastly different cosmological scenarios, including a universe that collapses or expands too rapidly. Proponents of the fine-tuning argument assert that the remarkable precision and delicate balance of the physical constants that govern our universe, which makes the conditions necessary for life, are highly unlikely to have occurred randomly. They argue that the fine-tuning points towards the existence of a purposeful and intelligent designer who orchestrated the conditions for our universe and therefore also life. It suggests that the fine-tuning of the universe is evidence of an intelligent designer or creator, commonly referred to as God.
The teleological argument from fine-tuning,
I want to stop it right there, because while that is true, and you'll find most notably the fine-tuning argument is something argued by theists. It's not just theists that argue this. It is an argument that is well established in the realm of philosophy. And specifically, you don't really need to assume theism for the fine tuning argument to be valid, because all what we see is that the universe seems ordered in such a way that it would appear rather surprising for it to have just happened naturally, because the philosophy of naturalism, which fine tuning attempts to address, assumes that everything essentially happened, all that we see essentially happened by chance. And it happened through completely random means, that chance encounters came about, that the world was formed in. So, case in point, when you see that all the planets are round shaped, that was just the natural forming of the universe completely by chance. Something else you see is the fact that atoms form together in a precise way that that matter can even exist, also came about by chance. And that is going to be rather surprising for everything to have happened just by chance, given all of the mechanisms that make the current universe what it is. That if they were even off by a little bit, the universe we know is incredibly alien and arguably might not even exist. That's what the fine tuning argument is saying. And you don't need to be a theist to appreciate it. You can be an atheistic Buddhist and also accept the fine tuning argument. You can be a Wiccan, that's also an atheistic religion, and accept the fine tuning argument. So while it's most commonly, oh, hello, I think someone wants to be let. Yeah, yeah, that dang Anglican, Ryan. Yeah, I don't see you here yet. Oh, there you are. Okay. Hello, everybody, and this is my co-host. Is your mic ready, my friend?
Co-host. Well, that's an upgrade from usual.
Okay. Well, okay. I can just call you subordinate monkey. Is that okay?
Well, I was telling you about all this hate crime stuff, so I don't want to have to do that to you.
Well, given other reasons, we probably shouldn't mention that anyway. But yeah, that's kind of what's going on here. Whereas the people that propose this the most do happen to be theists, but you don't need to
Right.
be a theist to appreciate this argument. Would you agree?
No. Dr. What is his name at Reasons to Believe? Doctor, I'm forgetting his name. The head of Reasons to Believe is an old Earth creationist who is an astronomist. He regularly engages with his atheist colleagues, his secular colleagues, who all state that they believe in fine tuning. It's well received in
Mm-hmm.
certain sectors of academia. That does not mean it is a uniquely theistic argument. It simply points to that, if you will, for as much as there was a big bang, there was also a big banger.
I agree. And obviously, I'd agree, but we're both theists. But the thing of it is, you could just simply argue, you could simply look at this and see that, like, or the orderliness of the universe is simply an eminent property of the universe, which again is rather surprising given naturalism. And in fact, if order is something that is eminent, that is just an eminent property of what the universe is, that by definition is no longer naturalism.
Right.
Here, let's mute up our mic so our audio doesn't interfere with the rest of the video. Anything you want to add before we continue?
Nope.
Okay, mute up, and here we go.
Very happy to admit right off the bat, this is the best argument that the theists have when it comes to cosmology. That's because it plays by the rules. You have phenomena, you have parameters of particle physics and cosmology, and then you have two different models, theism and naturalism, and you want to compare which model is the best fit for the data. I applaud that general approach. Given that, it is still a terrible argument. It is not at all convincing. I will give you 5 quick reasons why theism does not offer a solution to the purported fine-tuning problem. First, I am by no means convinced that there is a fine-tuning problem. It is certainly true that if you change the parameters of nature, our local conditions that we observe around us would change by a lot. I grant that quickly. I do not grant that therefore life could not exist. I will start granting that once someone tells me the conditions under which life can exist. What is...
Okay, I want to pause it right there, because that isn't a That isn't an incorrect understanding of the fine-tuning argument, because there are people that would propose that, yeah, life couldn't exist if it weren't for fine-tuning. But that also is a shallow understanding of the arguments being put forward, because we're not just
Right.
saying that life couldn't be without the fine-tuning argument. What we're
Right.
saying is there might not even be a universe without the fine-tuning argument.
Right, which is also what many atheistic scholars who believe in fine tuning would say. This is merely an intellectually lazy and dishonest way to approach it. I
Mhm.
dislike theism. I dislike theists' arguments. So I automatically bias myself and my audience against fine tuning. Okay, well, are you going to go argue with astrophysicists about this? I don't think so.
Mhm. And not only that, but the thing about it is the understanding of whether or not life could come about without fine tuning is a little bit irrelevant. And again, because when we just look at the universe itself, the constants of Earth having whatever the constants that Earth needs to exist are already incredibly rare throughout the universe. But then when we go further, the universe having to existing also requires variable constants whereby which matter couldn't even form. So, for instance, the strong and weak nuclear forces, without which protons, electrons, and neutrons do not form together as they ought, and therefore there's not even a universe to observe. Anything to add before we continue?
Well, I also find it interesting because wouldn't the evolutionary argument, even though obviously both of us are evolutionists, theistic evolutionists, depend on fine tuning?
Yeah, no doubt about that, because like,
Okay.
and exactly, because like, it's not just like, say, creationist theists, because I think the where this debate is coming from is Dr. Sean Carroll against William Lane Craig. Now, I've never seen the debate, but I think Craig is vaguely a creationist. I don't know what his opinion on evolution is, but like, it's not even just young Earth or even old Earth creationists that believe this. But yeah, this is consistent. You can accept this argument, and it will be consistent with everything we know about the material sciences.
Right. Well, that would effectively be my point. If you're a secular evolutionist, you must believe in fine tuning. You depend on fine tuning in order to have evolution. I don't think, though, that our speaker here has thought that through.
And I think there's a reason for that. If I'm not mistaken, he seems to be a PhD in the physical sciences, whereas William Lane Craig, well, he's a philosopher, so they're naturally going to argue about this from very different angles. But if you don't have anything else, we can mute up and continue.
Go forth.
Okay.
The definition of life, for example. If it's just information processing, thinking, or something like that, there's a huge panoply of possibilities. They sound very science fiction-y, but then again, you're the one who's changing the parameters of the universe. The results are going to sound like they come from a science fiction novel. Sadly, we just don't know whether life could exist if the conditions of our universe were very different, because we only see the universe that we see.
You can help save a baby's life for just $1 a day. Saving Moses has helped the world's most vulnerable.
Secondly, God doesn't need to fine-tune anything. We talk about the parameters of physics and cosmology, the mass of the electron, the strength of gravity, and we say if they weren't the numbers that they were, then life itself could not exist. That really underestimates God by a lot, which is surprising from theists, I think. In theism, life is not purely physical. It's not purely a collection of atoms doing things like it is in naturalism. I would think that no matter what the atoms were doing, God could still create life. God doesn't care what the mass of the electron is. He can do what he wants. The only framework in which you can honestly say that the physical parameters of the universe must take on certain values in order for life to exist is naturalism.
Wow. Talk about a scholar talking well outside of his field.
Yeah, I know. I noticed that too. And the thing about it is that that is a very theological and philosophically triggered argument. It's like, what does it mean to create? Now, I don't know how controversial this is with my theists, but my theistic friends, but I'm under the impression that actually God can't just break the rules. He can't just create, because the very act of creation itself requires intent. For instance, when you want to build a house, you don't just slap crap together and expect it to stand, and are surprised when it fundamentally fails. In the same way, when you're a sculptor, you don't just take like there's a scene in SpongeBob where it's kind of comedic. SpongeBob is supposed to be a really bad artist. He puts one chisel on like a big slab block of marble, makes one hit, and suddenly it becomes the statue of David or some sort. But that's not how creation actually works. In order to create something, it requires intent behind everything you do. Every chip of marble you make is intentional, whether it's making the shape, whether it's creating designs on the piece itself. Like I'd imagine like Michelangelo, as genius as he could be, couldn't do what SpongeBob did. Okay. And so what we actually see, I'm of the opinion that no, God can't just create things because he wants or desires to. There are certain rules that even God is beholden by, because that is the nature of what it is to create. You have to plan things. You have to construct things. It's a time-intensive project. And so the fact of the matter is, this goes into what does it actually mean to create something? Can you just create something because of hocus pocus magic? Now, there are theists that would think that, and I would say that sort of flies in the face of what we mean by the term to create. Your thoughts?
I not only completely agree, but I find it hilarious that you use the analogy about the SpongeBob episode. I know the one you're talking about. I never really watched it as a kid, but see here again, for someone in the natural sciences, you should automatically recognize the probability of something like that happening is infinitesimally small. It is also not the fine-tuning argument.
That is correct, but it's an attempt to debunk the fine-tuning argument. And again, I can see why that might be an angle he wants to take, because he's under the impression if God is God, he can just do whatever the hell he wants. And I kind of see that. There are theists that think that way. The thing about that is, this is also a hotly contested issue in the field of philosophy. Like when we say creation, what do we mean by that?
Yes. Yes. Furthermore, this is hilarious, because if you are going to then say, well, God is a supreme and omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent being, which is the implication here, then why would he bind himself with rules? Well, God obviously orders the universe. And if you are not going to say God, then something obviously orders the universe. It confines itself to various laws, like the laws of physics or the laws of the conservation of matter, mass, and energy. Clearly, a natural scientist would understand that, yet he's unwilling to apply that to his own argument. For shame.
Yeah, I can see, and this is kind of why I said at the beginning, Planet Curious is basically a it is basically a bunch of fundies arguing against God, because I think when you look at, again, when you kind of look at their catalog of videos, it is almost exclusively a bunch of atheists arguing new atheist arguments. And as we know, the vast majority of new atheists are just former fundies. And although they kind of drop the religiosity, they never
Pretty
drop
much.
the fundamentalism.
They're ex-fundamentalists who then become neo-atheists that do not understand logic and only embarrass themselves, unfortunately.
And yeah, I think there's something to be said for that. But the thing about it is that, if I'm not mistaken, Sean Carroll is a natural scientist. He's of the material side.
Yes.
Now, I may be mistaken on that. So
Well,
let me find out.
I'll only say that I do not know who these people are, or who Sean Carroll is, so I'm not going to comment on that. But the reason I mention embarrassing oneself is that for a natural scholar, you should have done your due diligence.
Yep.
That's what's expected of you as a scholar.
Yep. As it turns out, I was correct. He is a natural scientist. I did remember that about him. He's a physicist that had got his PhD from Harvard. So good on him. Good on him.
But he should know better, especially as a physicist.
Because ultimately the fine-tuning, and that's the thing. I don't even think this is a debate he should have taken on, at least without incredible amounts of prep time from his philosophical colleagues, because the fine-tuning argument isn't like, even though it makes comments about the material world, it is fundamentally a philosophical argument, and it can only really be settled philosophically.
Correct. This is here again. This is not a natural sciences argument. Unfortunately, our scholar here is assuming that while also somehow misrepresenting the argument. I don't understand how you can do that, but he
Mhm.
is.
Well, I think when you start from faulty assumptions, like this is a material science argument, you're going to come to very faulty conclusions. Like I can speak on the level of philosophy, and it's a textbook example of why you should stay in your lane when you specialize in a specific field. The philosopher should not be the atomic physicist. The atomic physicist should not be the philosopher.
Correct. The physical therapist should not attempt to be the biologist.
I agree. Anything else you want to add?
Nope.
Okay, let's go.
The third point is that the fine tunings that you think are there might go away once you understand the universe better. They might only be apparent. There's a famous example that theists like to give, or even cosmologists who haven't thought about it enough, that the expansion rate of the early universe is tuned to within 1 part in 10 to the 60th. That's the naive estimate back of the envelope, pencil, and paper you would do. But in this case, you can do better. You can go into the equations of general relativity, and there is a correct, rigorous derivation of the probability. And when you ask the same question using the correct equations, you find that the probability is 1. All but a set of measure 0 of early universe cosmologies have the right expansion rate to live for a long time and allow life to exist. I can't say that all parameters fit into that paradigm, but until we know the answer, we can't claim that they're definitely finely tuned.
Now, that is correct. I will grant this man, that is correct. But the fact of the matter is the
Did you
material
check your math?
yeah, but the material sciences rely on you following the evidence and following it kind of where it leads. And if it leads to a different place, you go to that place. Case in
Right.
point, we don't know how abiogenesis works. We don't know how living matter necessarily comes from non-living matter, but all the evidence we have of those steps suggests it absolutely can. And
Correct.
so the reason why the overwhelming majority of biologists accept abiogenesis, even though it hasn't actually been scientifically demonstrated or provable, is because the trace evidence that we do have points in that direction.
Correct.
Okay. And therefore, it's not an irrational thing to accept. And so, what he had said is that the odds of the fine tuning argument being valid in a universe is 1 because our universe seems to be finely tuned. And he might say, well, he might say, well, we don't have a big enough data set. It's like, well, unfortunately, we don't
Mhm.
get to have that data set. We go with the data we do have. And
Right.
yeah, this is precisely why going into more biblical studies, we come to the conclusion the woman caught in adultery in 1 John 5:7 are probably interpolations into the text. They're not original to the author. And we come to that conclusion is because even though we don't know that John maybe wrote these things in a very different context and light and just decided to change his way of speaking, right? What the trace evidence we do have suggests these were later authors adding that interpolation into the text.
Correct.
And so that therefore the conclusion that these are interpolations into the text is a rational conclusion to come to.
Well, a rational evidence-based
Mhm.
conclusion.
And
We're
so
not simply speculating as
Mhm.
our Muslim friends do.
Yeah, and so the fact of the matter is just because we only have one universe to work with instead of 2 or 3 or 4, okay, because all we have is a theory of relativity, the evidence we have, considering the fact that the only universe we're aware of does appear to be finely tuned, doesn't mean that's a bad argument. One can rationally come to the conclusion that because our universe was finely tuned, it very well might have been. Now, if we find a second universe that doesn't have the parameters of the fine tuning, now that proposes a major issue then, but that's not something we have. That's not a data set that has borne itself out.
Right. Here again, I say it's embarrassing because I would expect a scholar, although obviously they don't always do this, to do the research. He has clearly not examined the data. This is where I would ask, okay, why didn't you go to the philosophy department, like the Pale
Mhm.
Galilean says, or why didn't you go to the mathematics department to ask them to explain to you how these things work? Have them
Well,
explain Planck's constant,
mhm.
for example, because you didn't do your homework.
Well, and I would kind of retort to that. maybe he did. Again, he is a physicist, so evidently he should know what he's talking about, and he probably does. But the thing about it is, while you can explain the nuts and bolts of something, which material sciences do, philosophically, and because again, even the textual interpretation of the Bible, how we know there are interpolations in the text, we know that because the data sets have borne that out. But the fact of the matter is, when we put that in the philosophical level, then there is no rational reason that to believe that this universe is finely tuned is somehow a poor argument. Then that doesn't square.
Well,
Any,
it doesn't. And I'm not trying to insinuate superiority over a scholar. Of course, I'm
Mhm.
clearly not. I'm simply highlighting that as an ex atheist, this is one of the things that drew me away from atheism. I do not understand the cognitive dissonance with some scholars. You might be a physicist, yes, but that doesn't make you absolute. It also doesn't mean because I dislike a position or data, I get to poo-poo that because I don't care for it. No, it is your duty to explain why it is a bad idea.
Absolutely. Anything else you want to add before we go? I guess not.
No.
Okay, let's continue.
Number four, there's an obvious and easy naturalistic explanation in the form of the cosmological multiverse. People like to worry about the multiverse. It sounds extravagant. I claim the multiverse is amazingly simple. It is not a theory. It is the prediction of physical theories that are themselves quite elegant, small, and self-contained that create universe after universes. There's no reason, no right that we have to expect that the whole entire universe looks like the conditions we have right now. But more importantly, if you take the multiverse as your starting point, you can make predictions. We live in an ensemble, and we should be able to predict the likelihoods that the conditions around us take different forms. So in cosmology papers dealing with the multiverse, you see graphs like this that try to predict the density of dark matter given other conditions in the multiverse. You do not see graphs like this in the theological papers trying to give God credit for explaining the fine-tuning, because theism is not well-defined.
Oh, that's a seriously bad blunder right there.
Yep. So let me kind of respond to that. Well, here's the thing. I have a very simplistic explanation too that essentially completely conforms itself to all the evidence we see. God exists, and He fundamentally ordered the universe to what it is. It's a very simple explanation, as you can well tell. But understand the fundamental issue here is the fact that these arguments that he's proposing is assuming that there is a multiverse. And again, while that is a hypothesis and a real interesting one, that's not a data set that we have that is even nearly come to the same esteem that abiogenesis has, or biological evolution has, or even the fact of nuclear decay.
Right.
The fact of the matter is, even though it's a simple explanation, you need to demonstrate that simplicity exists, because theism is also very simple, okay? But we don't get to come to these conclusions based on simplicity. That's the issue here.
Right.
And so essentially what you go from basically assuming one unprovable assumption to another unprovable assumption. I
Right.
mean, and this is the thing. This is where I can see that Dr. Carroll has no training in philosophy. I don't know
No.
what prerequisites he did to get his PhD from Harvard, but I can guarantee you he barely cracked open a philosophy book, because
Well, right. This is what I mean by embarrassing. Clearly, what was his surname again?
Sean Carroll.
Clearly, Dr. Carroll did not bother to study much logic or philosophy. If he had, he would understand that you're effectively handing your opponent
Mhm.
the debate with these kinds of tactics.
Now, again, I haven't seen the debate, but I desperately hope Dr. Craig called him out on that, because really the fact of the matter is, simply replace the theistic argument that God ordered the universe to the atheistic argument that the multiverse exists. It's the same argument. It's really the same argument, because you're basically operating from an unprovable assumption. Again, there's nothing necessarily wrong about that, because you are justified in believing in unprovable things. But the fact of the matter is, that doesn't make the naturalistic argument any more rational than the theistic one. That's the problem.
No. That's why I'm saying it's embarrassing as well, because so far Dr. Carroll is not. He might be providing somewhat decent arguments. However, there is nothing as of yet which has satisfactorily debunked so-called fine-tuning. Furthermore, the proposition that we can debunk things like Planck's constant or the Goldilocks effect are hilarious. You may debate interpretations of those sorts of things, which is what scholars do all the time. What you cannot do is say, well, that's bad and it's stupid because I don't like it. Well, okay, you can dislike Goldilocks effect all you want. You wouldn't have an Earth without that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is I think it's that that comment more than anything kind of demonstrates his Dr. Carroll's ineptitude on the subject. And
Pretty much.
I don't mean that as a disrespect to Dr. Carroll, but the fact of the matter is, again, this is what I said before. This is fundamentally a philosophical argument. It's not
Yes,
something that natural sciences can settle, at least not to the degree we know about natural sciences.
that's correct.
Mhm. Anything to add?
No, I have
Okay.
nothing to add.
Off we go then.
Fifth, and most importantly, theism fails as an explanation. Even if you think the universe is finely tuned and you don't think that naturalism can solve it, theism certainly does not solve it. If you thought it did, if you played the game honestly, what you would say is, here is the universe that I expect to exist under theism. I will compare it to the data and see if it fits. What kind of universe would we expect? And I claim that over and over again, the universe we expect matches the predictions of naturalism, not theism. So the amount of tuning, if you thought that the physical parameters of our universe were tuned in order to allow life to exist, you would expect enough tuning, but not too much. Under naturalism, a physical mechanism could far over-tune by an incredibly large amount that has nothing to do with the existence of life, and that is exactly what we observe. For example,
And that fundamentally misunderstands even how the argument for fine tuning existed, because the argument for fine tuning didn't come about from a assumption of theism. That's not how it originated. What we were discovering that during the 19th and 20th and honestly 21st centuries, we were finding out more and more about the material universe and how it's constructed and how its laws come together, very succinctly and very orderly, in such a way that it made the fine-tuning argument valid. That's the thing, because the fine-tuning argument didn't come about by theists assuming God and therefore asking, well, if God created the universe, what
Correct.
kind of universe would we expect? No, it came from observing the universe and coming to the conclusion that theism is probably more rational than naturalism. That's it.
Correct. This is also by one of the base reasons, the fundamental reasons I use the word embarrassment. That's what scholars do all the time. Scholars set forth to establish what is a thing, let's define that thing, we study that thing, then we make conclusions based off of the data sets we have determined. How is it unreasonable to come to the conclusion through the clockmaker argument or the fine-tuning argument, however you wish to call it, that there is a God or at least a higher being orchestrating the world based on the data set? This is something that completely secular scientists in the field will say. I'm not saying they're theists even, but they will say it's unusual how precise this is. It seems to indicate that there is something beyond our comprehension ordering this. Are they stupid Christian theists? I don't think Dr. Carroll's prepared to say that.
Yeah, and more to the point, his argument there is essentially just swapping out the assumption of theism to the assumption of naturalism, because he's basically looking at the evidence of the universe. He's already looking at this from a naturalistic perspective. He comes to the conclusion, hey, the evidence here explains naturalism better. And it's like you basically, it's the tu quo fallacy or the U2. All right, you're not actually undermining the theistic argument. You're basically saying that I'm doing the same thing the theists are doing, and that's not a good argument. That's not a good argument, because at
No.
the worst case scenario, you're just saying, my hands are as bloody as your hands, and that doesn't make the argument true or untrue. Like this is something that you learn in undergrad philosophy. Okay, undergrads have a better understanding of this than I'd argue Dr. Carroll does, and probably because most of his education didn't revolve around philosophy, even though it really ought to. Like, philosophy and theology ought to be the queen of the sciences, because it's by studying these we learn to reason correctly, because theology and philosophy are closely linked. Almost basically they're married. In a sense, you don't have theology without a competent philosophy.
No, you
And
don't. You don't.
yep. And if you
I,
don't have any, I'm sorry if I interrupted you, but if you don't have anything to add, we can continue.
I will, again, just expounding on that for a moment. Dr. Carroll makes a fundamental mistake here. Some may argue that theology would be the queen of the sciences. You could also argue that philosophy would be the queen of the sciences. I'm not interested really in debating which is superior. Nevertheless, I find it interesting that if I were to say, for example, to a natural scientist, gravity doesn't exist, I don't like it. He is going to excoriate me up, down, left, right, and center, because gravity obviously exists, even though well, let me not say that. I don't want to sound like a young earther, but it's amazing he can do that when it comes to the natural sciences, but he cannot then apply that when it comes to something like philosophy. The argument here, again, lies in that there are so much data that suggests the Earth, or rather the universe, is fine-tuned. Why are you not even engaging with it? As of yet, he hasn't engaged with any of that data.
And I'm going to go on an assumption here. The reason he hasn't is probably because he can't. He doesn't have the wherewithal, the philosophical background to be able to do that. And he should have actually consulted. That's why I said he should have consulted theologians and philosophers before he went into this.
Or at least did his homework. I mean, if you're a scholar, you're capable of academic research, clearly. You've published academic research, I would imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Why didn't you bother to do that?
And I would actually respond, because it's kind of harder to do that than you would think, because again, I'm currently a philosophy major. Even in my own neck of the woods, and again, I'm studying this, understanding philosophical papers and the way they're framed, it's often as complicated as rocket science sometimes. Putting together all of these things and basically
Well, yes,
yeah.
but we're not talking about someone having coffee with his colleagues. We're talking about someone who, again, in preparation for a formal debate with another scholar, didn't do his homework.
Yep, I'd agree with that. I think that's all I need to say about this segment. Anything you want to add? I guess not. We'll continue on.
Example, the entropy.
Want to be a successful screenplay writer? With Squibbler's AI script writer powered by one
Entropy of the early universe is much, 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 much lower than it needs to be to allow for life. You would expect under theism that the particles and parameters of particle physics would be enough to allow life to exist and have some structure that was designed for some reason. Whereas under naturalism, you'd expect them to be kind of random and a mess. Guess what? They are kind of random and a mess. You would expect under theism life to play a special role in the universe. Under naturalism, you'd expect life to be very insignificant. I hope I don't need to tell you, life is very insignificant as far as the universe is concerned. Here's a photograph from the Hubble Space Telescope of a few hundred out of the hundreds of billions of galaxies in our observable universe. The theistic explanation for cosmological fine-tuning asks you to look at this picture and say, I know why it's like that. It's because I was going to be here, or we were going to be here. But there is nothing in our experience of the universe that justifies the kind of flattering story we like to tell about ourselves.
And there's nothing in the universe that debunks that flattering story. Again, the thing about it, the fact of the matter is, what we actually see, like, why exactly would you not expect a god to make a universe like that and then treasure one part of it? Like, that makes no logical sense. That because all of this was created, theism naturally has to exclude the fact that there's a grand plan to the whole of the universe around us, all those hundreds of thousands or maybe even millions of galaxies. There's nothing about that. There's no argument there other than sentimental pleading for your side. And I've never actually found this particularly convincing. Any thoughts, that dang Anglican?
No, I mean, I think you've covered it adequately.
Okay, well then we can safely dismiss this. Moving on.
So the fine-tuning argument is based on some apparent coincidences in physics that are genuinely intriguing. And I would concede this much to it, that if there is a physically inexplicable coincidence of the fundamental constants of nature, and I would concede inexplicable coincidence of the fundamental constants of nature, whose values have to be precisely tuned within a wide range of otherwise available possibilities to make a complex universe possible, then this constitutes a phenomenon which very naturally invites explanation in terms of a cosmic scale designer. But I also see good reason for caution and modesty here. First, we must beware our natural tendency to see purpose in things too readily. This can make us bad judges of what is an impressive coincidence and what is not. Secondly, we only have experience of this universe. So even making sense of cosmic probabilistic claims is problematic. Our experiments and observations have a sample size of 1, and we really have no idea of the range of possible alternative scenarios.
And I would suggest that's utterly irrelevant. Sure, I will agree. We only have a range of one experience. Well, again, one experience is all we have to go by.
Exactly.
As much as I would love there to be 10 universes and be able to study them both from an academic, philosophical, and natural science level, we don't have that. We can only operate on based of what we know. The thing about it is, and that's Peter Millikan, even in his own discipline, we have that. Again, we think on ways philosophically that people 2,000 years ago just never would have. And the reason being is because we just know a lot more about the world. We've experienced more things. We have about 2,000 years of retroactive thought that people 2,000 years ago just didn't. And so the fact of the matter is, as much as I will grant that, we might assign more purpose to the universe than it actually has. Granted, that's a possibility. That doesn't actually overthrow the argument being put forth. And that's the thing. I would also agree that fine-tuning needs to be approached cautiously, because I think it is
Right.
I think it's possible to overstate your case. And that's why
Of
really
course.
that's right. Really, the case for fine-tuning should be this: that when we look at the universe and everything that constructs it, it is put together with such precise parameters that without those parameters in place and without those constant parameters in place, there isn't a universe. And so I don't even kind of put the ability, how put it? I don't even put the expectancy of life into that equation, because you really don't need to, because ultimately you don't even have life without a universe for it to inhabit.
Correct.
And so the fact of the matter is, I think if you keep your fine-tuning argument on a broad level of things we do know for sure, rather than that precise level, you have a very well put, well-structured argument. And so I don't think Peter Millikan's case here is all that powerful, because it can easily just be contradicted by being more careful with that argument.
Right. Here again. This is well, let me think of what I want to say. Let's go forward.
Okay, so I'll just continue on then.
Thirdly, we can't rule out that some deeper explanation will be found for any apparent coincidences. For example, Guth's theory of cosmic inflation can explain some of them. There might be multiple universes, such as a world ensemble, an evolving sequence, or a complex of bubble universes, each with its own Big Bang and different conditions. Then it would be no surprise at all that observers have evolved only in those universes that are conducive to life. Fourthly, the physics on which this entire argument is based is young, incomplete, and radically imperfect. It's less than 100 years since general relativity and quantum mechanics, our best theories of the large and the small, were developed, and we still have no way of reconciling these with each other. String theory attempts this and speculates that the universe has 11 dimensions in order to facilitate it. But that still has a very long way to go and is widely regarded with amused skepticism by experimental physicists. Even worse.
So before we continue, again, I just want to kind of stress this. All these problems are essentially null and voided when you're
Right.
just more careful with about how you apply this argument with what we know about the universe. In fact, the fact of the matter is, it is in fact general relativity and the possibility of string theory that is the origin for thinking on these terms. As in, the fine-tuning argument doesn't come about just by assuming God and looking at the universe and how orderly it is, and therefore assuming God did it. It's the fact that theists look at the orderliness of the universe, and not even theists, even atheists, and they come to the conclusion, it might be very likely this universe was in fact tuned. Now, was that by God? Not necessarily, but I'm going to kind of just maybe strong man's Millikan's argument here. Let's assume, for instance, that a universe somewhere far outside of the observable light spectrum formed, and then it formed exactly like ours did. That is you get round planets, you get gravity, you get the gas laws, you get the strong and weak nuclear forces, the whole royal flesh, you might say.
Mm-hmm.
That itself is now really interesting, because the fact that you have two universes, or maybe three or four, however many might be in this hypothetical, that are just like ours, suggests that, there might not be a God that had finally tuned those universes, but there certainly is something there that I would argue kind of excludes naturalism, because when you get one explosion, yeah, that might be an accident. When you get two, well, now the odds of that being intentional, or at least having some intentionality, raises. In fact, that would actually make Buddhism more consistent in this regard, because what Buddhism basically argues, that order is just intrinsic part of reality. That order is just the order.
Right.
Yeah, that order's balance with chaos is just a part of reality, that it just is. It always was part of reality. And so, thing of it is, if we find another universe that's like that, that actually that might take some of the wind out of the sails of theism, but it certainly gives a huge downburst to say Buddhism or other atheistic philosophies like that just assume order is something intrinsic to reality.
Would you replay his third point?
Yeah, let me rewind about 20, 30 seconds. Hey, Diego, nice to see you.
Hello,
Anyway.
Diego.
But I think that was one more.
General relativity and quantum mechanics, our best theories of the large and the small, were developed, and we still have no way of reconciling these with each other. String theory attempts this and speculates that the universe has 11 dimensions in order to facilitate it. But that still has a very long way to go and is widely regarded with amused skepticism by experimental physicists.
Let's pause
Even
it right
worse,
there.
barely 30 years have passed.
Would you pause it? Yeah. That's not exactly correct. String theory is only one of the theories.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that. So I understand. Yes, it is a popular one. Yes, it's received quite a bit of press attention, but that's dishonest. There are other theories.
Yeah, I absolutely would say so. And again, it's precisely these discoveries that inspired fine tuning, And so it's basically, it seems to be argued that theism is assumed and fine tuning comes out of that when the opposite is true. It's actually just the natural sciences that advance and then inspired this philosophical thought. Now, I will say this. Millikan is not going at making the I'll say this much. I think it was very smart for Planet Curious to bring his voice on because he is not making the sort of grandstanding statements that Dr. Carroll was, and that's because Millikan is an actual philosopher. He has
Right.
he has a PhD in that, and so he's not debating against fine tuning the way that Millikan is, and I think he's a smarter man for it. And what he's saying is we essentially have to be careful with the argument. What he's saying is that a lot of the people that use fine tuning aren't that careful with it. And to that degree,
Mhm.
I would
He's not
actually,
wrong.
yeah, to that degree, I would concede that with him because I can't count on the number of my hands and toes how many I've seen young Earth creationists say the fine tuning is essentially buried atheism. And
Which is incredible. I mean, that they should use that argument to support their position.
yeah, exactly. Because now here's the thing. I think the fine tuning argument buries naturalism, given what we know about the material sciences thus far. But I would not go as far to say it buries atheism. In fact, there are these even in ancient Greece, you had these philosophers that were essentially called Platonist atheists, and the reason they were
Mhm.
and the reason they thought that is because Plato believed that there was this order to the universe that even the gods, say Zeus, Athena, all of them, were confined to. And it is this order of the universe that the gods are good because they conform themselves to this order. It's not that they're good in their own right; they are capable of evil, but they are good because they conform to to the order of nature we see in the universe. That's what Platonism was arguing, and honestly, the way in which my philosophy is formed, if I were to be atheist, I'd be that kind of classical atheist.
Right. Let's continue because he got to a certain point on his third point with which I wanted to interact.
Okay, let's go. Just tell me when.
I will.
Since the existence of dark matter was corroborated, and only 13 years since dark energy was postulated. We still
And
don't have much
so-
clue what either of these are.
Well, let's
But
pause
analysis
right
of the
there.
latest data
I don't know when this debate occurred, so I'll be generous in that regard. But there have been some pretty significant advances in terms of dark matter and what was the other category he said? Dark matter and energy.
I think so. Yeah. Let me rewind about 5-10 seconds.
and only 13 years since dark energy was postulated. We still don't have much clue what either of these are.
Is that what you wanted to hear?
Yes, that's patently untrue. There have been quite a few advances in regards to our study of dark matter and dark energy at this time. We have learned quite a bit about black holes in the last few years that we didn't previously understand or know. Now, I'll be charitable. I don't know when this debate or discussion occurred, so I can't judge as to what Dr. Carroll may or may not have known or had the potential to know. Nonetheless, that's not I mean, again, to state, okay, well, this is only 13 years after this particular scientific finding. All right, well, if we apply that to, say, for example, I don't know, what's a significant finding in the natural sciences? Let's say the first heart transplant. Does that mean, therefore, that it's invalid? Does that mean, therefore, that it's a speculatory
Yep.
thing? Well, clearly not, because the first
Yep.
heart transplant worked.
Yeah, I mean, I'd imagine if there was something wrong with your atrium or ventricle, you would trust the doctor to perform open heart surgery.
Exactly. So I understand the generalization, but there's the difference between that and malaise, which is what you see
Yeah.
here. The dark energy, I mean, ironically, dark energy and matter, if you study it, seems to point that there's definitely something more. than our observable universe out there. And that is not the conclusion of one uneducated man like myself. That is the conclusion of those who work in the associated fields.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Anything to add before we continue?
Nope. Press forward, if you will.
All right, let's mute up.
But analysis of the latest data from space suggests that 72.8% of the mass of the universe is constituted by dark energy and 22.7% by dark matter. That leaves only 4.56% as atomic matter, the stuff that we knew to exist prior to 1980. In short, a huge proportion of modern physics, including the results that Bill appeals to, is extremely recent and riddled with unsolved problems and anomalies. How likely is it that the physics of 100 years hence will look the same?
Okay, let's
God does
stop
not
right there. This is the same failure that every atheists make because it's an argument based on relativity. Well, and subjectivity. Well, morality is not objective. Okay. Well, you people have been saying this for centuries. We're more advanced now. Well, I'm quite certain if the world continues another 7.5 centuries, I'm not so certain whether it will or it won't. Most of our scientists in those fields will say it will. Let's assume for conversation's sake that it would. Human society, if it survives, will very likely be vastly different by that time.
Mm-hmm.
Does that disprove what we've learned in the past century within the field of physics? No.
Yeah, absolutely.
I
Because, and
well,
again,
if I may finish my point, just bear with me.
go ahead.
This is what you call shooting yourself in the foot.
Mm-hmm. I agree. But also, thing about it is, when we look at things about where we've advanced, again, philosophy has advanced in the last 2,500 years because there was a book by Aristotle called On Physics. And essentially, Aristotle got a lot of things wrong about physics. And again, we've come a long way to the point where physics is essentially very distinct from philosophy. But Aristotle was not wrong in postulating his theories on physics with what he knew about the world. And similarly, it could be that the fine tuning argument might be debunked in 100 years, 500 years, 700, who knows? Okay. That doesn't make it an invalid argument. And that doesn't mean that exploring that argument as a genuine as a genuine thought experiment and something we can learn about it, it doesn't make that invalid, because essentially his argument is, well, we may learn more things and therefore the fine tuning argument is debunked. Okay, I grant that. It doesn't mean that we can't learn meaningful things by taking this argument seriously, nor does it make an invalid argument based on what we know now. Because here's the thing: while people follow Aristotelian ethics to such a degree, they're basically baked into the modern landscape of Christianity. Again, I don't know too many people that would subscribe to Aristotelian physics over Newtonian physics, but that doesn't make Aristotle's book on physics null and void. There are still things that we can
Correct.
learn about it, and
And we are.
yeah, exactly. And that doesn't even make the work useless to take his arguments on physics relatively seriously. We can still learn things despite the fact we vastly prefer Newtonian physics. And so this whole argument is that, well, times and the worlds and what we learn changes. It's like, so what?
Mm-hmm. That is where, again, okay, well, you can't then take any data from physics. I don't know if the Dr. Craig called him for this debate. I hope he did. This would be where you buried your own position. You just annihilated your own field.
Mm-hmm. And as far as I know, I could be wrong about it. Let me see if I can get a timestamp here. Yeah, we are at. Yeah, William Craig was in this debate too. Okay, now It seems as though, and again, it seems as though William Lane Craig is Planet Curious's favorite theologian to go to, at least his debates, I suppose. Interesting that, but that's all I basically had to say in regards to that comment. Anything else? I guess not. Let's go.
Have to work within anything like the existing physical rules in order to create the universe. He can make up and impose whatever rules he likes and know infallibly, without even having to experiment, exactly what their consequences will be.
And as I addressed with Dr. Carroll, that is a huge assumption to make, especially for a philosopher. Again, this goes into what exactly does it mean to create? Can you create something nuts, bolts, and everything with just a snap of your fingers? Now, Augustine simply seemed to think that because he would believe that the whole universe was created instantly by God. I, however, am not so sure because, again, when we think of creation, it's something that is time intensive, something you plan, something you build, and I see no reason why God should be exempt from that nature, where the very act of creation means to plan. The very act of creation means to fine tune what you're trying to do. Again, if you're building a house, you don't just use any bits of material you find. You have to form it. You have to cut it. If you need a 2x4, you don't settle for a 4x4. Okay, this is how you build things. This is how you create things. And so I see no reason why God should be exempt from that. When he creates, he can just do it on a scale so fundamentally more cosmic than we're able to.
Oh, absolutely. Let's continue, please.
Let's go.
So if his main aim was to create a universe finely tuned for the development of intelligent life, one has to say that he's not been very efficient. Apparently, it has taken nearly 14 billion years just to produce one species capable of relationship with him. To put that into perspective, if we think of the time since the Big Bang as a year, then the early Bronze Age was 11 seconds ago, and the life of Jesus of Nazareth barely 4.6 seconds. Moreover, according to the physics on which the fine-tune argument is based, even the entire period in which the stars and planets exist will be utterly dominated by the vastly longer period of black holes.
Okay, I'll just say it like this. In the fitness space, we see people doing this exact sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
They'll start talking about a bunch of data that, although it might be true, is completely useless. Listen, you don't need to know what the vastus medialis does in order to understand how to squat.
Mm-hmm.
You do not have to understand that the glutes are the antagonist muscle that are being worked in a hip thrust, while also that it is a compound posterior and anterior chain exercise. All you need to understand is how to do it. This is a prime example, at least academically, of that sort of phenomenon. It's totally useless information. This doesn't discredit anything. I think I understand where Dr. Carroll is going with this, or at least he thinks he's going. But to what end?
Yeah, exactly. Now, also, I think this objection is just kind of irrelevant because, again, this is under the assumption that God could just snap his fingers and create everything. But this goes into more philosophically in-depth questioning because could God do that? Because for all we know, maybe God had to wait 14.6 billion years to create a life form that could have a relationship with him. Okay.
Well, worse for Dr. Carroll, he conceded that God is this sovereign being. If God chose to wait 14 billion years to create one species to commune with him, then so what?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Dr. Carroll, what exactly is the problem? You've already conceded that if you were a theist,
Yep.
then you believe in what seems to be a sovereign monotheistic model of God.
Yep. And so one correction there. This is Dr. Milligan, not Dr. Carroll anymore. But
Oh, Dr. Milligan, I didn't realize we'd switch doctors. Well,
yep,
either way, the
yeah,
critique still stands.
exactly. But now the thing about it is, he even kind of said it as himself. If you put the whole history of the universe, all 20 billion years of it, into a single year, well, it demonstrates my point. From God's perspective, that might as well be 20 minutes. Okay.
Well, St. Peter quotes Psalms that says, "A day to the Lord is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is a day to God is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is a day to the Lord." God does not rule by time because He created time. God is timeless.
Okay.
Therefore,
Hey,
I would
real
yes.
question. Do you have another channel you're trying to get onto? Because there's a Ryan here.
No, there's only me.
Okay, so Ryan, I'm glad you want to join, but real quick, I need to see your web camera. You don't need to have it on in stream if you value your privacy. I just need to make sure you're a real person.
I have a feeling it's probably a troll.
And it very well may be a troll, and and again, I will happily let a troll on if he has something to add, but I need to make sure that's a real person. So until you make your webcam known, you're not getting on here, okay? And again, when you get on, you can shut your webcam off, conserve your privacy. I'm not letting you on until I know you're a real person. Anyway, let's continue.
Well, I wasn't quite done, but
Sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Unfortunately, with our interruption, I've now forgot what I was saying.
Okay. Okay. Do you remember now, or do you want to continue?
Let's just continue.
Yes, sir.
Considering this as 1 year, the life of man on this planet would be an unimaginably tiny fraction of a picosecond. Big jumps in science have generally involved having to think of things that we couldn't have thought before. Think of quantum mechanics. Think of the bending of space in relativity theory. How likely is it that the first thing that comes to the primitive mind, namely an agent who did it, is going to be the answer to our most difficult scientific questions?
And
Oh dear.
I have an even better question. How likely is it that something that came to consciousness immediately sees agency in the world? What's that? Okay, no, Ryan he don't look like your typical troll. I think this is just a dude's name, Ryan. He showed me his webcam. So I'm gonna add him on. He's not a troll I recognize. So I'll let him on for a bit. Hey, Ryan.
Hi, thanks for letting me on.
Oh,
Not
okay.
a problem. Hey, I'm sorry about the strict rule. We've been dealing with trolls in the past, so I just want to make sure you were
That's
a
fine.
person.
I understand. Yeah.
Okay. Anything you want to add here?
Yeah. So you guys are reviewing like the fine tuning argument, right?
That is correct.
And which is there a particular version you guys are most acquainted with or favor?
I think there are a lot of arguments I favor, but I think it's definitely the most powerful one for if not for theism, definitely against naturalism.
Right. Would it be fair to portray the fine tuning argument as a very low probability of it being of those conditions, those preconditions for life arising by chance or some natural random processing?
Yes, I would say so. But again, I kind of broaden that a little bit because the chances of life coming about in a universe is the way what we know about it now seems to be particularly high, given the fact that life as we know it is carbon. Carbon is the most common molecule in the universe that we know of. And so it's not unlikely it could be it's not unlikely that that life could come at, say, another planet. I think when you broaden the argument that the universe itself requires very precise constant and multiple constants, what you come to the conclusion of is that without these very precise constants, there's not even a universe for life to appear in. Does that make sense?
Right. Mm-hmm. And
Yeah.
how would you respond to someone, say, who brings up like the multiverse theory, right? So you could
Mhm.
probably have like a bunch of universes that are so radically different from ours, but still
Mhm.
have potentially exist simultaneously.
And for that, I would say the only evidence we really have that multiverses exist is Marvel Comics and Doctor Who. Okay. And the reason is because it's a fascinating hypothesis, and certainly it isn't impossible, but the fact is that it's just that it is a hypothesis. It comes from quite literally just a single observation. So one of the observations that had led one to the hypothesis is that all atoms vibrate at a single frequency, but when we get down to the quark level, quarks vibrate at different frequencies, and so it's been suggested that each quark could be its own universe. Okay, that is infinitesimally smaller than ours, and may actually be a universe that can exist on in a different place in space. But it is that observation and maybe one other that suggests there is a multiverse, as in the how would I put it? The odds of a multiverse existing, okay, is about as probable and has as much proof going for it as a god existing. So, in the same way that we haven't found a god floating around the Andromeda galaxy or even our own Milky Way galaxy, we have not found another universe outside of our own. And so, if you want to argue that fine tuning can be undermined by the multiverse, you can make that argument. But understand, you're making that argument on the same level theists make theirs.
If I could
Yeah,
also
I
insert the
see.
thought, if I could also insert the thought, there is an inherent problem. How do you account for all of that random probability? We're talking about multiverses that have an untold variance in degree. And then there's one multiverse may have one Earth in our galaxy. Another multiverse may have one Earth with two moons. Another multiverse may have two Earths, one moon. These are all probable in that, or possible in that scheme. Here's the issue that I would take with it, at least. If there is a universe, then we know what created the universe. What, therefore, is the generative force behind all these different multiverses in the universe, which are all intrinsically complex, far beyond our understanding? And what, therefore, governs that production process?
Exactly. There's that too. But I mentioned there were two observations that suggest the multiverse hypothesis might have weight. The first was the fact that quarks vibrate at a different frequency. The other actually comes from Einstein's relativity, where he said that it's possible to go into the future. And the question is whether it's possible to go into the past. And you get a whole bunch of paradoxes. And the classic one is, would you kill baby Hitler? And one of the thought experiments is, if we're possible to go back in time and kill baby Hitler, there's a problem with that in terms of relativity, because if you go back in time and do that, you've essentially destroyed the reason that you went back in time to begin with. And so the question is, if you assume that you can go back in time, go back to past times, and there are physicists that think you can, the question is, what would happen? Because you now have a paradox. And an answer to this paradox is that by altering the time stream, you have created a new universe, which is parallel in existence. And to that, I would add, if the multiverse exists on that level, where you can actually create new universes by interrupting and messing with the time stream, that ironically would actually give credence to fine tuning, because there is now a mechanism that creates parallel universes that are just like ours. And it seems as though that wouldn't happen by chance. That's a rather surprising thing for that mechanism to come about by chance on that level.
Right. Hmm.
Anything you want to add? Ryan?
I was, mm, Yeah, I guess one small clarifying question. So is the fine-tuning argument basically the theological argument? Like St. Thomas Aquinas's fifth way, like
Yeah.
the argument from design, but just
Mhm.
mixed with modern like scientific evidence, would you say?
Well, I would argue that the people that devise the fine-tuning argument probably familiar with Aquinas' teleological argument, and certainly people that make these arguments, especially in the theistic side of things, certainly would assume the teleological argument. The fine-tuning argument itself doesn't require Aquinas. In fact, wasn't even devised with Aquinas in mind. It came about because of the scientific advances of the 19th, 20th, and 21st centuries.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for having me on. Um,
not a problem.
I
Not a problem.
like your profile picture of Saint Maximilian Kolbe,
Oh, well, thank you,
and
brother.
yeah, but I don't know whose profile picture is that for that dang Anglican.
I think that might be Saint Anselm, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, I don't even know if he's a saint. I could be wrong on that, but I believe that's Anselm, right, Ryan?
Saint Anselm of Canterbury.
Yeah, and also that dang Anglican goes by Ryan, and so I think I'm just gonna.
Oh,
Yeah, I know you
oh,
both share the first name.
right. That's
Yeah,
why you said if it was his second channel, right? Okay, I see.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, and
yeah. I'm a
also
different Ryan. Yeah,
oh, we both know that now. But
yeah.
thing about it is, he has been the subject of various amounts of trolling, and some of that is also leaked over here, which is why I kind of have that
Ah,
content policy where I
yeah,
need to see your webcam, right?
yeah. That's
Yeah.
I understand. Yeah,
Yep.
with like online, yeah, you can never be too sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Now, if you want to stick around, you're more than welcome. But if you got your curiosity satisfied, you're welcome to leave too. This is it's an open door.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. I have to go anyway. So thank you for
Okay.
having me on, and God bless. Yeah.
Not a problem. God bless you, brother.
Yep.
Immanuel Kant famously said, there will never be an Isaac Newton for a blade of grass. In other words, sure, you can find some physical explanation for the motion of the planets, but never for something as exquisitely organized and complex as a biological organism. Except, of course, that Charles Darwin then went and did exactly that. We can paraphrase Dr. Craig's message of saying, there will never be an Isaac Newton for the cosmos. But everything we know about the history of science and the current state of physics says we should be much more optimistic than that. Thank you.
And that is basically the only that. And again, I think actually that was Dr. Carroll that right there. He made and I think that's probably the only good point he made in that presentation. With what Planet Curious has put forward, at least. Any thoughts, Ryan? Going once, going twice, 3 times. Okay, I guess Ryan's mic ain't working right now. So I think that'll just about do it. That was the whole video. I did what I wanted to do, basically within an hour and a half, which is really good. All right, everybody. And that has been Planet Curious with the video fine-tuning argument debunked in 12 minutes. And I want to cite my sources here, so I'm going to do this and kind of put this in the description later. But I'm going to have to do that post-editing. Anyway, thank you for everybody. It was nice having you. And this has been another installment of the Pale Galilean with your host Fro and your co-host that dang Anglican, other known as Ryan. And I will see you later in the next installment. God bless, Viva Cristo Rey, and always pray the Rosary. Bye bye. Oh, there you go. Bye bye.